Hi guys, welcome. This is another episode of Cooking with Chef Phil. Today we're at Baked Desserts in Berlin with my good friend Robin, and we're going to make up a batch of the Worcester Technical High School's famous cinnamon buns, or breakfast buns as we call them. Some of my students made a request that I make these, so let's take a look. So the recipe is simple. This recipe makes about 40 to 50 buns depending on the size in about just over 2 hours, so about 2.5 hours. You can have between 40 and 50 buns depending on your size. We're going to start with a quart of whole milk. We're going to then add a cup of vegetable oil to the milk. And then we're going to add a cup of just plain granulated sugar to the pot with the milk and the oil. The key here is to get a big enough pot to warm this on the stove, because then we're going to put the yeast on top of it and let the yeast bloom. Then we're going to add the flour right to the pot and mix the dough right here by hand in the pot. So let's go to the kitchen. So now our milk, sugar, and oil has come off the stove. We cooled it down using a thermometer to about 117 degrees, which is perfect. You don't want it over 120. I'm going to take my yeast. Here in the cup I have 4 teaspoons. We're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon. So we have 4 1/4 teaspoons, and we're just going to sprinkle the yeast over the top of the milk, oil, and sugar mixture. So the sugar is going to help feed the yeast. It's going to kind of look like this, and we're going to let that sit for about a minute or so, and that's going to start to bloom the yeast. Once that sits for about a minute, then we're going to add our flour to it. So the recipe calls for 9 cups of flour. We're going to add 8 cups of flour. The final cup will get added later. We're going to then take the mixture. Again, it's milk, oil, sugar, and yeast, and our flour. We're going to let that sit in a warm place, covered with a towel, for about an hour until it almost doubles in size and the gases start to fermentate and the dough rises. At that point, we're then going to punch it down, add the rest of the flour, and we're going to add baking soda, baking powder, and salt. So I'm just going to let this sit for a few more minutes, and then I'll come right back to you and we'll add the flour. All right guys, welcome back. So the yeast has been in the bowl for about a minute or so now. So I'm going to add my 8 cups of flour. And this is just standard AP or all-purpose flour. Now it's funny we're doing cinnamon buns right now because flour and yeast are 2 of the hard things to find in the grocery stores because of COVID-19. So if you have it at home, you're lucky. If you don't, just keep trying because they'll get it back in the stores soon, I'm sure. So I'm just going to mix this. We just want to mix it till it's incorporated. We don't want to overmix it. And then we're going to let this sit and rise for about an hour. This is the longest the recipe is going to take. The rest of it's really quick after this. Alright guys, so we still have about another 20 minutes on the dough as it's rising, so we're going to go ahead and make the icing while we wait. So for the icing, I'm going to add my butter. So I put this in the microwave just for like 10 seconds just to soften it. You can see it's still pretty solid. And we like lots of icing, so I always double the recipe for the icing. So for this we're using a half a pound of butter, which is also 2 sticks at home. To that we're going to add a teaspoon of salt. The icing is really sweet, so the salt helps balance out the sweetness. We're going to add a tablespoon of maple syrup, maybe a little extra. We're going to add a half a cup of dark espresso. I'm just going to add a little splash of rum. And then we're going to add 4 pounds of confectioner sugar or 10x sugar. We're going to put this on the mixer with a paddle and let it whip up, and then I'm going to add about a half a cup of milk as it's mixing till it's the right consistency. Alright guys, so it's been an hour. Our dough is nice and risen, as you can see here. So I'll recap real quick. So this is our milk, our sugar, our oil, and our flour. Okay, that's all and our yeast. So that's what's in here right now. In this bowl, I have the remaining flour. So the recipe calls for 9 cups. We have 8 cups of flour here, 1 cup of flour here, along with our baking powder, baking soda, and our salt. We don't add the salt to the yeast originally because the salt helps kill yeast, where sugar helps grow yeast. So we wanted the yeast to grow and get healthy before we start to retard it with the salt. So I'm going to use a bench scraper, just a little, to help get this out of here. And the dough is still sticky at this point because we still have more flour to add to it. So all I did was put my dry ingredients in here, and I took a whip and I just mixed them together. I'm just going to take this and add it right to my dough. And then again, I'm going to use my hand, but I'm going to use like a pitchfork. Like I'm going to keep my fingers separate, and that's going to help to knock the air out of the dough and incorporate the extra flour into the dough at the same time. So I'm going to get this mixed up, and then we're going to divide it and we'll start rolling it out. All right guys, so now we have our dough that's all mixed. It's nice and warm. You can put your hands on it and feel the heat. It's nice and smooth. So I'm going to take my dough and I'm going to cut it in half, because we're only going to work with half of it at one time. So I'm just going to take my other dough and stick it back over here. I'll cover it back up and just kind of let it sit there. So now I'm going to take some flour and just kind of flour my work table. You can use a Sillipat or a baking cloth if you like. I prefer just a stainless steel or butcher block table. Okay, now we're going to roll this out into a rectangle. So about like a yardstick in length, but we only needed about a foot deep, okay? So as you can see, my dough is more oblong or rectangle. So we're going to roll it out. And this is a recipe that I've just kind of played with over the past few years, and I've just kind of adapted it and made it work. You know, changing little things each time I make it until I kind of get a nice, easy breakfast dough. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And depending on how big you roll it, depends on how many rolls you get. So we're going to get between 20 and 30. We have our filling. So our filling, again, is 2 cups of sugar. I use about 1.5 cups of granulated sugar, and then I use about 1/2 cup of the natural sugar, or sugar in the raw, and then I use my cinnamon. And it calls for 1/4 cup of cinnamon. I always do like a heaping 1/4 cup of cinnamon. So we're just going to mix this. Another good thing is just use a wire whisk. Just mix your cinnamon sugar together. Now remember, the cinnamon sugar and our pound of butter that's melted is for both batches of cinnamon buns. So we're only going to use about half of it for this. So I'm just going to take my melted butter And I'm just gonna pour about half of it onto the dough. This is ready to get to have fun, right? Just gonna spread this around again using my hand. You can never have enough butter. When I was in college, one of my favorite chefs was Chef Davini, and he was my gourmet chef, and his thing was fat equals flavor. So that's kind of my philosophy now, is fat equals flavor. I'm gonna leave just a little strip along the top edge, filling it over the melted butter. And we're gonna use about half of this mixture. And this is what makes the cinnamon bun really yummy. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to start with the edge closest to me. Don't worry about the butter and the cinnamon oozing out, because that's what makes it really good. And I'm just gonna start to roll this up like a giant burrito, really, really tight, as tight as you can. Now you could take a knife and square this off before you start. I just normally take the ends and cut them off, and I bake those separately, and those are the little good bits that you get to eat without everybody else. So now that I have this done, I'm going to roll this over facing me, and I'm just going to take my fingers and kind of pinch this seam that has butter but no cinnamon sugar along the one side. So we're going to pinch this closed, roll it back over, and now we're ready to get our pan and start cutting these and getting them ready for the oven. So now I'm going to cut these ends off, and I'm just going to set these aside. And then we're going to use about an inch and a half cut, and I'm just going to eyeball these. I've been doing them long enough that I kind of know what they need to look like. A lot of butter, so it's all oozing out, but don't worry about it. That's what makes it really good. And I don't like to put parchment sheet on my baking pans when I'm doing these, because the sugar and butter starts to caramelize, and it just makes a really big mess when it sticks to the paper. So if you have a Silipat mat, you're welcome to use that. Or I just like a well-seasoned sheet pan that I sprayed and put melted butter on. And I'm putting these on the pan, not exactly touching, because they're going to rise and they're going to spread a little bit when they bake, right? So you don't want them right up against each other. You want to leave a little bit of space in between them. So the cinnamon buns are out of the oven. You can see I've already started putting some icing on some of them. They rose and they plumped up nicely. These were the small pan that we have. We kind of flipped them over and they look like a nice little rose. They're really yummy, trust me. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take a small scoop and I'm just gonna do one little scoop of icing in the middle of each one while the buns are still warm. And the icing will just kind of melt and ooze down into the cracks and over the buns. And that is where all the yumminess comes in. I wish you could smell them. Now at this point, if you want to take some caramel or pecans and sprinkle on top, you're more than welcome to. I personally think they're fine just the way they are. And we'll just let the icing finish melting over them. Let them cool a few more minutes, and then they'll be ready for a nice cup of coffee. Thanks.
And there you have it, our fresh out of the oven cinnamon buns. They take about 2 hours and 30 minutes from start to finish. Big thank you to our friend Robin and Baked Desserts and Gallery in Berlin, Maryland for the use of the commercial kitchen and their expert assistants.